When I talk about pensions, I am aware that the subject immediately brings divisions, admittedly not as strong and striking perhaps as those over Brexit or Scottish independence. But in simple terms, pensions are things older people like me aim for, we dream of. But the bitter twist is that much of us, what us grey hairs hope to retire on, is actually going to be funded by younger people like today's production team. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you. Who will almost certainly never be offered a state pension themselves because there ain't enough money in the kitty. Too many old people like me and not enough young workers on decent wages. We've pushed the retirement age back to 66. And there's two more delays in the pipeline. I think it's 68 by 2040 something to defer the crisis. So when our new Labour government announces a plan, a hope to boost pension pots by £11,000 per worker and unlock billions more in investment through a review of retirement savings, a worrying thought immediately flashes into my consciousness. Oh me, oh my, has the Daily Telegraph been right all along? Is Labour going to spend its way into growth, essentially using our pension savings, playing the markets to fund new infrastructure? And I guess one reason I worry about such things is because I'm of a generation that had the great misfortune, not just to witness, but actually to work, albeit briefly, at Robert Maxwell's Daily Mirror, where the flamboyant lifestyle of the boss was funded by the money taken from Daily Mirror workers' pensions and the money they've been dutifully paying into the company pension pot for decades. The net result was most workers only got half of what they were entitled to. Another reason I worry is it wasn't so long ago we saw countries like Iceland go under after playing the markets. Although interestingly, I note their pension today, they're robust and investment has played a big role. UK pension schemes are expected to manage about £800 billion by 2030, so you can see the appeal to Rachel Reeves. And we're told the review will look at how they can be encouraged to invest in productive assets such as infrastructure. Why does that worry me? Why am I being paranoid? Because as well as supporting the government's aim of boosting economic growth, the Treasury has said that this would also ensure better returns for savers, increasing the average pension pot by more than 11 grand. There's sensible, less scary stuff in the pension schemes bill. Even I can see the advantage. Help savers by introducing automatic consolidation of smaller pension pots, a value for money framework to improve governance. Rachel Reeves has said, in that direct quote, "The review we're announcing is the latest in a big bang of reforms to unlock growth, boost investment and deliver savings." And she's meeting the pensions industry tomorrow, I believe, with the Pensions Minister, Emma Reynolds, by her side. Emma Reynolds says she's been even stronger in terms of what ambition she has for our pension funds. These are her words. Over the next few months, the review will focus on identifying any further actions to drive investment that could be taken forward in the pension schemes bill, before then exploring long-term challenges to ensure our pension system is fit for the future. And this is the line that got me. There is so much untapped potential in our pensions market, with an industry worth around £2 trillion. Do we trust government to look after all that untapped potential? Now, to be fair, as I understand it, and I'm hoping my guest can correct me if I'm wrong, the previous government under Chancellor Jeremy Hunt also did look at liberating to some degree pension schemes. But as far as I recall, it was more about how they were being run rather than how the money could be used for investment. And so, apart from hearing your gut thoughts, first of all, this morning about whether or not you are comfortable with your pension money being used to buy the country into growth, to drive infrastructure, I suppose that's the critical question. 03456060973 is the number. But first I'm going to turn for some guidance, because I don't mind telling you pensions is not my specialist subject or anything close to it. But I'm pretty sure that Professor Richard Murphy, economic justice campaigner and pensions expert to boot, has some strong opinions. He joins me now. Always a pleasure to see you. Good morning, Professor Richard.
Hello, Matthew. Good morning.
Am I being paranoid? Am I being needlessly worried by what I'm reading?
I'm worried by what you're reading, so I don't know why you aren't. And I've got grey hair. I'm an old age pensioner now. I don't know how that happened, but I reached that point, and here I am. Still employed, I should add, and no intention to retire just yet. Maybe that's the future, and that is what people worry about. But let's talk about Rachel Reeves and what she's talking about.
Please.
There's a lot of nonsense in here. First of all, let's just talk about some of the numbers. 800 billion. I've no idea where that number comes from in what's been put out overnight by Rachel Reeves and her team. I have no idea where the 2,000 billion or 2 trillion that Emma Reynolds is talking about comes from. Because the truth is, the last time private pension schemes were valued in the UK was by the Office for National Statistics in 2020, and the figure was 6,445 billion, or 6.45 trillion pounds, near enough. So their figures seem to be remarkably small in proportion to the total amount that is invested in private pensions in the UK. So clearly they're targeting some pension schemes and not all. My suspicion is they are talking about the pension schemes that are managed by companies,
Yes.
or very particularly the pension schemes that are managed by local authorities in the UK, which are worth around £360 billion. So we're talking about a microcosm of the whole issue, and we're not talking about all pension funds. In other words, they're leaving out of this all of those private pension funds, which individuals, self-employed people and so on pay into themselves, and they're only talking about corporate funds. That's point number one.
Right.
So you are not going to be at risk if you're talking about your own money. Secondly, let's just talk about the logic of this, because at the same time that Rachel Reeves is putting out these notices, we are hearing some enormous noises. There are 3 articles in the Financial Times this morning, because I've read it this morning, about the pension crisis that is supposedly coming our way. And I didn't read a single article like that before the election results. So this is clearly coordinated by the pensions industry. And what are they saying? The message they're putting out is very simple, very straightforward. We're not getting enough money in from automatic enrolment, pension subscriptions. We need more cash from you. So the target at the moment is actually at those funds which are mainly paid into by those on lower earnings in employment, who are automatically enrolled by their employers in a group of pension arrangements, the most common of which is something called Nest, but there are plenty of others, and where the employee has to pay in 5% of their earnings and the employer has to pay in 3%. As a result of which, it is now forecast that if you only get 8% of your earnings paid in a year over your lifetime, you will not get a decent pension, on top of whatever state pension is paid at the end of the day. And let me also add there that our state pension in the UK is absolutely lousy. It is the worst in the European area, would have been in the EU, and it's pretty bad by OECD terms. OECD is the rich companies of the world terms. If we knock out the various smaller countries in the OECD, our pension is bad. Some figures say it's 38% of what the average is. Now, you can work this out in various ways, but it's pretty grim. So the state doesn't provide enough pension here. We are heavily dependent upon private investment, supposedly to provide pensions, and there is the problem. Rachel Reeves is saying that the savings that are being made aren't enough, and I'm saying the savings that are being made aren't being invested appropriately. She's got it all wrong. I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think she understands the economics of pensions. I don't know how long we've got, so I'm going to try and be as brief as I can.
Can I ask just the idiot's question? So, so in my simplistic world, I just see that I agree. The pension fund is a vault full of money. We have the UK in pretty shoddy state in terms of infrastructure. Is it Rachel Reeves is thinking I'm going to take the money from this vault, this pension vault that maybe I shouldn't be opening, and I'm going to spend it because infrastructure is good for growth, provides jobs, it's all going to be good for golf, and then ultimately the benefit that will come from that growth will enable me to put extra money back into the vault that I shouldn't perhaps have opened in the first place. Does that in any way bear any resemblance to reality?
No, not really. I'm sorry, Matthew. It's all rather simplistic. First of all, there isn't a pot of money in most pension funds. There are investments, and investments are not money. Investments are in shares, and they are in bonds, they are in property. There will be some cash. Cash doesn't do anything in a pension fund at all because cash does not fund bank lending. And that is something that most people think it does, but it does not fund bank lending. Banks create the money that they lend. They don't use depositors' funds. So that's the first mistake. And secondly, the value of the shares and the properties and everything else is dependent upon what is going to happen by the time you retire. Let's talk about somebody who's 20 now by the time they retire, and they are paying into a pension, or they could be auto-enrolled at the age of 21 into a pension. What's going to happen by the time they retire? The world's going to be very different. Climate change will have happened. The industries that we've got now, including most of the large investments which are managed on the London Stock Exchange, including all those miners and all those oil companies and so on, are going to be very different in terms of value from where they are now. And infrastructure is going to be very different, because infrastructure is going to focus upon things that we haven't even thought about, like serious flood defence, which hardly exists in the UK at present. So it's going to be a very different world. What we need to do is actually make sure we get real investment in that. The only people who can actually direct that investment are the government, but Rachel Reeves is wanting to outsource that to pension funds. Big mistake. They don't want to do it because they need a guaranteed rate of return to fund their pensions. The only person who can guarantee that rate of return is the government, so the government should be doing the job in the first place and not using the pension fund as an intermediary.
Okay, there's a hell of a lot in what you're saying, and I've been hanging on your every word. I'm going to introduce Peter Edwards, if I may now, Labour commentator, former editor of Labour List to boot. Morning, Peter.
Good morning.
I mean, it was a fairly damning appraisal from Professor Richard Murphy. I wondered if you could find any wriggle room to come back and address some of the criticisms he's made.
Yes, I can. I don't think it was a fair portrait. And of course, one can quibble over some of the individual numbers, as you would about any company or any country, sure, making predictions about where we'll be in 20, 30, 40 years' time. But look at the big picture. We know that pension funds want to invest in the UK, and growth is at the heart of Labour's strategy. So incentives for pension funds to invest in all their infrastructure stuff, and whether that's bridges for today or flood defences for tomorrow, they're both a good thing, and there's a little bit of Keynesian economics about it, in a sense of you're encouraging people to build stuff and spread money in the economy. But they also know this can be good for individuals. We're all going to be pensioners if we live long enough. Pensioner poverty has increased. The last estimate I saw yesterday was around 1 million people living in poverty after the retirement age, and these challenges often increase because we've had high inflation. Housing costs have outstripped general inflation. People are living longer, but often with health problems. Yeah. And if you think about someone who's done a physical job, they can't necessarily work beyond 60 or 65. And Richard mentioned he, and perhaps you, and perhaps even I, people that have had careers in the media, will carry on doing bits after the age of 60 or 70. But if you've done a physical job, you're not necessarily up for doing that.
Said.
And then finally, just briefly, I think this is good politically as well, because as you'll have said on your show many times, the Tories are winning the pensioner vote hands down over the last 20 years. For Labour to engage with pension issues early on, I think is a good thing.
Okay. Labour got involved with institutions, financial institutions for PFI. It was a John Major idea, but Labour really capitalised on it under Tony Blair. And the net result is we have a whole lot of hospitals with bills still coming into taxpayers measured in tens of billions of pounds that weren't anticipated. Government playing with our money, invested money, which, if Richard said it is right, isn't actually sort of in cash form. It's already in investments and bonds. I mean, you can forgive some of us for feeling mildly anxious that that it's not really, is it the government's job to start investing the money that we've saved? When local authorities started investing the money that had come through from council tax revenues, some of them caught a cold and have gone broke. It's not, is it a good place for a Labour government to be investing pensioners' money?
Well, I would question that, really, because, say you worked for XYZ local authority for 30 years and then retired, your pension fund is held either with that authority or with a local government pension scheme. So doing a bit more to aggregate those, I think, is a sensible thing. We also got to bear in mind the government doesn't really build houses. It's either private developers from Britain or foreign developers or local authorities. So I think we've just got to quash this myth a bit that we're going back to, a planned economy where the government's going to run your pension and build every house.
Okay.
That's not the case. And in terms of risk, again, we've all got money invested, whether we realise it or not, because anyone who's paid into a pension fund, as I have, and you may well be perhaps different if you're freelance, as many folk in the media are, but if you've had a job on payroll and signed up to a pension scheme, we've all got money invested. And there's generally not a guaranteed rate of return on that.
That's true. One last question from me. What's in it for the big institutions, the people that have the money that Rachel Reeves wants to get their hands on? Because let's be honest, they never do these kind of things for free. What's in it for them?
It's return, but also, to be frank, it's having a say in the future of Britain. Because again, every new Chancellor, and Jeremy Hunt, to be fair, did the same. You go along to meet big companies and big employers, supermarkets, house builders, and say, how can we work together? But we also perhaps the ones who are not on the high street, like fund managers and pension funds, want to invest in the UK. If they can do anything to improve their return, but perhaps with some fairly boring and sensible stuff like building bridges, so a low risk investment, that's good for their members over the long term. But any business knows actually that collaborating with government can be a good thing, because the government will always be here and will always have projects to fund.
I think anybody who witnessed the various collaborations with the last Tory government over COVID can understand the benefits that are there for private business and private enterprise. I think it was patently obvious. It is really interesting, and you put forward a strong argument, Peter. I have to say, speaking personally, I'm still left in doubt. I am concerned. Be interesting to hear your thoughts, young or